When we are told to worship God or when we are close to the Lord, trying to care for Him, Satan, the subtle one, often will not tell us not to do it, but will propose a way different from God's revelation in his attempt to keep us from God's economy. As long as he can keep us from God's way and frustrate us in fulfilling God's purpose. Satan will even motivate us to do things for God. This was how he worked in Cain. We should be careful. The same thing may happen to us. We must realize that it is not a matter of what we do, but of what we are. The real issue is not whether or not we worship God, it's whether or not we are one with the devil in whatever we do. Even if you love others by being one with the devil, that kind of love is an insult to God, because Satan, God's enemy, is active in it. Thus Cain was the one who presented the offering, but the devil was the motivator, the one who initiated Cain's act of worship. Suppose you have an enemy who refuses to be reconciled with you, yet he sends someone to worship you. Will you not consider that worship as an insult? Now we can see what was wrong with Cain. Cain offered the fruit of his own labor to God. He brought the fruit of the ground with no blood for shedding. This means that he had rejected God's way of redemption, which he had heard from his parents. God's way of redemption, as revealed to Cain's parents, was that of a sacrifice in which the blood was shed. For without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. Man was fallen, ruined, sinful, and polluted in the eyes of God. He needed a shedding of blood for the remission of sins. Although Cain's parents surely spoke to him of God's way of redemption, he rejected it, casting it aside. Cain did not care for God's way. He invented his own way according to his concept. What is a concept? The human concept is of the tree of knowledge. By taking the way of the tree of knowledge, Cain opened his being to the devil. By doing this, he was completely caught by the evil one. Cain was the first to invent religion. You may argue, Cain invented religion to worship God. He did not invent gambling casinos. However, God does not care for what you invent. He cares for the origin. Anything invented by man is not originated by God and is not by man's spirit, but by his mind. If your invention originates with yourself in your mind, that invention, regardless of how good it is, has its source in Satan. For Satan, the subtle one, is in your mind. When Cain devised his own way of worshipping God, he was absolutely one with Satan. He was filled, saturated, and permeated with the devil. Therefore, the Lord Jesus in John 8:44 alluded to him as Satan. How dare such a person present an offering to God without the shedding of blood? Now we can understand the reason that God did not accept Cain's offering. Although Cain should have realized that what God wanted was a sacrifice with the shedding of blood, he did not offer it accordingly. He worshipped God according to his own concept, without the shedding of blood, and without the covering sins of the sacrifice. This means that he rejected God's way of taking Christ as God's righteousness to cover him as revealed in Philippians chapter 3 verse 9 and 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 13. He, like the religious Jews, sought to establish his own righteousness, ignoring God's righteousness and not submitting to it as revealed in Romans chapter 10 verse 3. Thus, his offering was an insult to God. It was an abomination in his eyes, and he rejected it, going his own way. Jude 11 speaks of those who have gone in the way of Cain. What is the way of Cain? It is to do good, to please God, and to worship God presumptuously by man's own effort and according to man's own invention, under the devil's motivation. The way of Cain is to worship God religiously without Christ. In a human sense, the way of Cain is not bad, for religion is the best invention of human culture. In fact, according to the Bible, religion was the first and foremost invention of human culture. However, we must ask the question, who invented religion? It was not Cain himself, but Satan, the motivator within him. Satan usurped the first human generation by tempting them to take the tree of knowledge. Nevertheless, God intervened to rescue them and to recover them by his way of redemption. Although in a sense both Adam and Eve were lost, God came in to bring them back to himself, opening his redeeming way, the bloodshedding way. That was God's way of rescue, of salvation. We have seen that Adam and Eve passed on this way to their children, and that Cain, their firstborn, rejected it and took his own, becoming one with the devil. That rejection, that following of his own way, was the rejecting of God and the following of Satan. This is the evil way of Cain. God has given us a full revelation of his way, regardless of how much Adam and Eve preached to their children. They did not have the Bible as we do. We have a Bible of 66 books telling us in full of the way of salvation, the way of life, the way of shedding blood, and the way of Christ. We have the way. However, many people have heard of this way, that is, have heard the preaching of the gospel, but have turned aside and have taken their own way, attempting to worship God according to their own concept, and trying to do good to please God according to their own desire. A great many people are taking the way of Cain. The way of Cain is not to gamble in the casinos, it is to devise a human religion, a way of worshipping God that is not according to God's revelation, but according to man's invention. Apparently this is good, actually it is dreadful, for by inventing religion, the second human generation was completely captured by Satan. Satan gained the first generation by tempting man to eat of the tree of knowledge, and he captured the second by turning man from God's way to the way of human invention.